Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of CIPE's Free Enterprise and Democracy Network Conference. My name is Ritika Singh, and I'm a Senior Program Manager on the Global Programs team at CIPE. Thank you for joining us for this session on the importance of youth empowerment and intergenerational collaboration for development. I'm delighted today to introduce our three panelists for this session, Robin Sitoula, Blossom Egbude, and Aleksandar Stankovic. Robin Sitoula is the co-founder and executive director of Samriddhi Foundation, an economic think tank in Nepal. He has designed and implemented several research, educational, and advocacy programs in areas of entrepreneurship, economic policy reform, and democracy. Robin successfully established a nonpartisan youth movement in Nepal in the late 90s. He has worked with 8 major political youth organizations of Nepal for many years and established one of the largest collaborative leadership programs amongst contesting parties in Nepal. Next, we have Blossom Egbude. She's a Nigerian lawyer and policy professional. Blossom is currently a MasterCard Foundation scholar at the University of Cambridge, studying for a master's in public policy. Building on her legal background and impactful work in community organizing, she most recently served as part of the global policy and advocacy team at Global Citizen. She was also a 2021 Carrington Youth Fellow of the United States Consulate and a 2022 CIPE Youth Leader. Blossom was recognized as one of Africa's top 50 rising women under 30, trailblazing in the field of social impact. Finally, we have Aleksandar Stankovic, a 25-year-old professional from southern Serbia. He is completing his education at the Faculty of Technical Sciences at the University of Novi Sad, specializing in project management. Currently, Aleksandar serves as an IT project manager at NCR, and beyond his academic and professional pursuits, Aleksandar is a dedicated follower of industrial policy developments with a keen interest in global trends and these political and economic developments that shape our world. So before we jump in, a quick housekeeping note for everybody. I will set the stage for our discussion, and then we will have a conversation with this excellent panel until approximately 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time. And after that, we'll take some questions from the audience. So please type in your questions as you think of them. I'd like to kick off the conversation then with some numbers. My team gets the credit for this research, but I got some updated information on this topic that I wanted to start the dialogue with and set the stage with about young people and democracy. Today, there are 1.2 billion young people between the ages of 15 to 24, and that accounts for 16% of the global population. I'm sure most of us know, but just to reiterate, Central and South Asia are home to the largest number of youth, followed by East and Southeast Asia, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa. And in the 47 least developed countries in the world, the youth population is projected to increase by 62% over the next 3 decades. But we're here today because young people are increasingly dissatisfied with democracy and no longer believe that it can deliver for them. This youth dissatisfaction with democracy and the decline in that is not only in absolute terms. I think that's really important to mention. It's also relative to how older generations felt at the same stages in life. And around the world, we're seeing, and studies are showing, that young people have become increasingly disengaged from political life. Youth are voting less, they are rejecting political affiliations, and they largely believe that their country's political leaders are not really serving their interests. But the low levels of participation are a long-established trend across the globe. So I do want to stress that this isn't exactly new. There's been a decreasing youth voter turnout in all democracies since the 1980s. This reflects a lot of apathy, right, and mistrust and dissatisfaction with democratic processes, and it just kind of feeds into the democratic backsliding narrative. But why is this the case? And of course, we'll get into this in our panel, but youth discontent is driven by perceptions of economic exclusion. And that's really illustrated by the high youth unemployment rate in so many countries, widening economic inequality, and disappointment that youth have on issues that are important to them, particularly education and the environment. In developing countries too, persistent corruption and weak governance and absence of the rule of law continue to plague young people's faith in democracy. The last point that I'll make in terms of setting the stage is sort of a troubling one, which is that populist and authoritarian leaders have a unique ability to appeal to youth who are discouraged by democracy. And we've seen that countries that have elected populist leaders have seen a recovery in youth satisfaction with democracy. So on average, individuals aged 18 to 34 see a 16% increase in satisfaction with democracy under a populist leader's first term. So that's a little bit of a troubling trend. But CIPE does believe that the private sector has a role to play in strengthening democracy, and that includes helping democracy deliver for youth. CIPE has worked on youth empowerment for many years through entrepreneurship training and certification programs, working with and nurturing policy leaders, capacity building for youth organizations, and developing resources and guides to help youth advocate. I would just like to start by talking about the first one, which is entrepreneurship. CIPE has been working on entrepreneurship in general, but youth entrepreneurship specifically for many years, because we've seen that entrepreneurs act in ways that advance democracy, right? Kim Betcher, CIPE's Director of Policy and Program Learning, basically puts it this way, which is directly we see a benefit. Youth entrepreneurs often assume leadership roles in society. They have initiative, they have problem-solving abilities, they bring new perspectives, and these youth entrepreneurs can become a leading constituency for reform. And we also do see that an entrepreneurial mindset and business leadership are a strong foundation, of course, for civic leadership too. And indirectly, we see that youth entrepreneurship leads to greater youth political participation. So often entrepreneurship is the only door that is open to youth to participate in their economies. And economic inclusion supports political participation. They go hand in hand. Youth entrepreneurs have a stake in society that other young people often don't, and this incentivizes them to advocate and engage in their countries. So ultimately, by focusing on entrepreneurship to bring new entrants into the economy, like youth, we see positive ripple effects on political pluralism and civil society and just other essential elements of democracy. But I will stop here. I'd like to turn it over to Robin first to give us a real-world example of this. So Robin, tell us about your on-the-ground experiences working on youth entrepreneurship. What did Samriddhi do, and why did it matter to democracy?
Well, thank you very much, Ritika. I'm really delighted and very honored to be a part of this panel organized by FEDN at CIPE. And the issue that we're delving today, I think is very important. It's in my heart because my own personal career started as a youth activist, and later I became a policy activist. So I've been in this field of policy engagement and youth engagement for about 25 years now. And since I started as a young person, I really cannot forget the fact that young people are very important in this whole process, and thus the panel for today on intergenerational, bridging the intergenerational gap is really important to me. I really like it. Thank you, Ritika, again, and CIPE for inviting me into this panel. Starting off on entrepreneurship, for us at Samriddhi, one of the very first projects that we did in the initial days of Samriddhi, in partnership, in collaboration with CIPE, was the entrepreneurship program for young people. It was called Arthalai, meaning School of Economics and Entrepreneurship. And we reached out about 500 people directly, and we reached out a lot more indirectly. But what I remember today vividly is, and this was one of very successful programs in Nepal, which I'm coming onto it. But what I really remember on youth programming and youth and entrepreneurship doing this is that it's always contextual on what the demand is and why we are doing what we are doing. And we started doing entrepreneurship in the light that Nepal had, in 2008, Nepal had recently come out of a decade-long conflict. And democracy had been restored after an active monarch. And young people didn't have faith in anything, be it let alone democracy. Right. And so in a situation like this, most of the college graduates that we spoke to or surveyed, they wanted to finish their undergraduate degrees and go abroad. That was the only choice they were seeing. And so we came here saying, okay, how about us being able to, do things in Nepal, set up businesses in Nepal, set up enterprises in Nepal. So we started doing this entrepreneurship training. So what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make here is, I think context and the demand in programming is always important. And I think entrepreneurship is one program that is always demanded, because young people are always entering the job market, entering the labor force. For example, about 2% of our population enters job market every year. So that is a huge number, and the amount of employment that is being created is very, very negligible. Sometimes it's going it's negated. Sometimes we are losing jobs than creating jobs. So creating entrepreneurship then becomes creating entrepreneurs and doing entrepreneurship programs then becomes very important. That's I think a practical issue that I wanted to put in. The other thing I wanted to highlight about what we were doing was we ran economic lesson and entrepreneurship hands-on exercise for a week with follow-up programs. These are mostly university undergraduate and graduate students, and they would go back. Many of them would go back to their colleges and set up what they called entrepreneurs club, whereby they were able to promote the message, keep the zeal going. But in the long term, later, the impact was very interesting. The impact where many of these young people either set it up their own enterprises, or set it up enterprises to contribute to the policy ecosystem of entrepreneurship, or the overall ecosystem of entrepreneurship. Like some set it up incubators, some set it up venture funds, some set it up institutions that were providing management and strategy support to these entrepreneurs. So this is a whole lot of ecosystem that was being set it up by these people. And also many others who didn't want to become get into business actually have become policy advocates who are advocating for better policies for entrepreneurs, and more so for young entrepreneurs. So this has been the result. But on the larger level, you might be wondering, or you might be asking, is somebody doing it currently? We're not. We did it for 6 years and we stopped doing it. This was one of the highlight programs that we were doing, and we decided to stop it. And here's the reason why we stopped it. The reason we stopped it was we became so popular that universities picked it up, and they became, now entrepreneurship is mainstream university programs. There are MBAs and bachelor program on entrepreneurship that you can do. We have helped a university to set up their courses. There are many organizations, private sector and development organizations, that are doing entrepreneurship programs. Entrepreneurship is now buzzword with the government or the development community or business community. So everybody is doing entrepreneurship. So we said, oh, well, that's what we wanted to do. We have been successful. We trailblazed it. Therefore, we should exit from this market and move up in the ecosystem, because there are many other things that entrepreneurship requires, youth entrepreneurship requires in the ladder. So we ourselves, per se, we moved on to saying, okay, we will work on easing the policy environment for entrepreneurs. So that's where we started focusing. So this is, kind of a summary on what we did and what we achieved. And I'm happy to, answer questions later on. There you go. Ritika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's great to hear about the success of this program and the evolution of it. So let's keep with this theme of entrepreneurship and free markets and kind of drill down a little bit more. I wanted to ask you, Robin, what are some other ways the private sector can help democracy deliver for youth besides entrepreneurship? What role can businesses play to ensure their policies address the economic needs of young people in their countries?
Well, coming to private sector, I think, or business community, I think one thing we should not mistake, or we should not over expect of private businesses is private businesses are motivated by profit, right? And they look at their own profit more than anything else. And this is a primary factor that sets up private businesses and private entrepreneurs. But in the course of making profit, they offer benefits, larger benefits to the society, including young people. So one of the things private sector could do is private sector in countries like ours, where politics and policy making is a little, a little tumultuous. Private sector always has a strong cloud in, informing policies and, and changing regulatory environment. Okay? What private sectors can do is often they can rise above their own industry interest and make regulation and policy easier for everyone, and especially for young entrepreneurs to participate or to be a part of the enterprising ecosystem. Currently, some of the problems young entrepreneurs face and get harassed is dealing with policy on registering companies. Once you register a company in Nepal, it is almost impossible to exit a business, right? And all these things can be made easier if private sector was able to rise above their own interest. Right? On the other side, private sector has also shown examples or great examples on how they're helping young people benefit from this. For example, private businesses with an intention of profit, right, can or are around the world now setting up venture funds or are doing investments in startups, right, or acting as angel investors, right? And this is the true intention of making money in the future. But this is what young entrepreneurs exactly need. They have a great idea in mind, but they don't have the capital to invest. They don't have maturity that a bank would say, okay, I'm going to invest you. So I think these kind of services that private businesses can create can immensely help young entrepreneurs achieve the delivery of democracy. And this is only possible in democracy. Also, private sector is always useful in sharing their experiences with young people, inspiring them, telling them their story on the struggle of being an entrepreneur, because without struggle you cannot be an entrepreneur. That is pretty much there. And after you fail 19 companies, you become a successful companies on the 20th time, and this is often the case. But these stories of established entrepreneurs private sector people can always be inspiration and a benchmark for young people who want to come into the business of doing business, right? The other thing that private sector can do is offer fellowships and mentorships to young people in running these businesses. And one very important aspect that private sector could do is use their CSR towards this end to help organizations that are helping young people to become entrepreneurs, because private sector sometimes due to regulatory mandate and sometimes by choice have to spend on CSR, a certain percent on CSR. They could focus that on private sector. Or many private organizations or companies, after being successful, they set up a small fund to give away every year. That's a small percentage of their income, and they could channel that towards this end. So these are, I think, broadly some ways I see that private sector and businesses could be of use to young entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Robin. Those are some great ideas that we should discuss a little bit more in the Q&A portion. But for now, I would like to turn it over to Blossom to talk about her experiences in Nigeria. But first, I wanted to also quickly share some numbers again. But Nigeria is Africa's most populous country. I'm sure most of us know that. But it has 93 million registered voters, almost 40% of whom are under 35. And then Nigeria has one of the largest youth populations in the world in general. So about 64 million people are aged 18 to 35, and the median age is 18. With that being said, youth unemployment in the country is hovering over 40%. So I have a loaded question for Blossom, and I'll ask Aleksandar the same one later. But Blossom, tell us, do young people in Nigeria believe that democracy delivers?
Thank you so much, Ritika, for that very loaded question. And also thank you for having me on this panel. I would say that there are varying opinions from young people about whether democracy delivers or not. But, especially given Nigerians' long and adverse history with democracy. And while some recognize that democracy is in place to promote accountability and representation in leadership, many young people have not experienced this accountability or representation. And the only reality that most of them know is corrupt leadership, economic inequality, and a government that does not prioritize the needs of people, especially young people. And so there's a lot of skepticism with young people in Nigeria about democracy because they do not believe that it does, they believe that it doesn't deliver, at least for Nigeria. Many young people are frustrated with the pace of change in the country. And, they have seen this same problems being recycled with Nigeria's democracy throughout their lifetime. And it has created a sense of helplessness and disinterest in political participation. Take, for example, in the recent elections we had in January, the presidential elections came first and then the gubernatorial elections came second. And, with everything that young people saw going out to vote for the presidential elections, the number of voter turnouts reduced significantly for the second set of elections because the first election was characterized with violence, electoral manipulation. And so there's a lot of helplessness right now with young people in Nigeria, especially regarding democracy. But while people have varying thoughts and perspectives on it, the common thread is that young people want a transparent and accountable government that delivers for them and that promotes national cohesion and prosperity. They want a leadership that is in service to and accountable to the people for achieving a sustainable future. However, a lot of them have not experienced this for themselves. And so I would say that young people in Nigeria do not believe that democracy delivers for them at all.
Thanks, Blossom. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the election since that just happened earlier this year. And as I mentioned in my introduction of Blossom, Blossom was a CIPE youth leader in 2022. This program, the CIPE Youth Leadership Program, basically funds young people to conduct either an advocacy or a research project around the themes of youth and private enterprise or youth and democracy. So I'd like, Blossom, if you could just please tell us about the project you conducted and your experiences as an election monitor in Nigeria's February election.
Okay, so during the CIPE Youth Leadership Project, I created a project called The Citizen, and the point of the project was essentially to take civic education to the grassroots communities in Nigeria. As a first-time voter myself in 2019, I had a personal experience with my brother. We had stood on a queue for across 2 days. We had to go back the first day and come back the next day because the queue was so long, just so we could get our voters' cards and register as voters. And while we stood on that queue, it took us so long to get our cards, our temporary cards, which were supposed to be exchanged for permanent cards in the weeks leading up to the election. And, so we go back after, we've registered to get our permanent cards, and we're told that our details were not on the voter database, which essentially meant that we couldn't vote. So that was the first time that I was disenfranchised as a Nigerian. And it just really exposed me to the inefficiencies in the system and how vital groups, especially young people, are excluded from, taking action and participating in their own in their civic responsibility. And so this led me to really think deeply about how we could approach issues like this, especially around elections. And then I had another experience going for an outreach in the local community around me. And, we had gone there with like food and clothes and some things like that. And someone walked up to me, one of the members of the community walked up to me and asked me what political party I was from. And I said, we're not a political party, we're just, a nonprofit trying to do some good. And he said, oh, I wish you were from a political party, I would have voted for you. And I asked further questions and realized that it was something that they had seen happen several times, especially during elections, where, candidates would go to these communities, promise them food or give them food, give them money. People sell their votes for as little as 5,000 naira, which is barely $5 right now, and they go and vote for those candidates because they have given them something or given them an incentive to vote for them. So they don't think deeply about why they are voting for a particular person or what this person can deliver on or what their manifesto is. For them, it's about this is their immediate need and this person can meet that. So they would vote for that person. So this prompted me to, create this project called The Citizen. And it was essentially to ensure that we can take civic education to the grassroots, to excluded communities, to people who are often overlooked and who are only remembered by the government when it's time for them to, contest for elections. And so the project essentially was widespread across Nigeria, across the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. We had, it was through radio shows because we were trying to bridge the digital divide that exists in Nigeria. Some people don't have access to cell phones or anything like that. So, but almost everyone has access to a radio, at least in the community. So we thought that would be the best way, to penetrate that community. And we also ensured that the shows were done in indigenous Nigerian languages. So they were done in 3 Nigerian languages because a lot of them, again, may not be able to understand English. So we wanted to bring civic education to their own context and break it down in a way that they would understand, because the elections were approaching, the next set of elections were approaching. And the show educated over 3 million Nigerians across the country in rural communities, and it attracted people like a policy aide from the Nigerian Senate, a technical advisor to a government, and it was really, really widespread, and I learned so much from the project. And then I eventually went on to be an election observer afterwards. I worked with a nonprofit that was trying to ensure that elections were more inclusive for people with disabilities. And it was really a sight to behold. The presidential election happened 2 weeks before the governorship elections. And I remember going to vote during the presidential elections just in February this year. And after I cast my votes and I left, I had heard that there were thugs who came to my polling unit who had, broken ballot boxes and torn papers and chased the election officials away. And so essentially our votes were void. So they were not counted as part of the overall votes at the end of the day. So that's the second time Nigeria has disenfranchised me. And then the governorship elections, a lot of people witnessed those things across their own polling units as well. So when the governorship elections came around 2 weeks after that, there was very low voter turnout, especially from young people. But then I still went out to vote again at my same polling unit. And this time I couldn't even vote at all because at my polling units, the election materials were taking so long to get there. It took them hours and they still did not come. And for others around me, there were people who were standing at, ballot boxes, people who were supporting a certain political party, standing around ballot boxes, looking at who people were voting for and actually hitting people for not voting for their own political parties. So, I feel like the issues are very cross-cutting. There's ethnic divisions, religious divisions, party divisions. There's just so much that's currently happening when it comes to Nigerian democracy. But, so now I'm seeing that while civic education, which my project did, is very important because there was increased voter turnout, I think, the main struggle that we're dealing with now is the loss of, or the lack of public trust that young people have in the government and its agencies to deliver on the democracy that they have promised. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Blossom. Some of those stories and incidents that you recounted are really disheartening. But yeah, I think that it really illustrates the scope of the problem, of course, with elections in general, but specifically why young people are so disenfranchised. Let me turn it over to Aleksandar. Same question, Aleksandar, for you as I started with Blossom. Do young people in Serbia believe that democracy delivers?
Hello, Ritika. Thank you for having me. So, coming from a technical background, we are going to start with a few numbers, if you don't mind. So, according to the National Youth Council of Serbia, we see that in 2022, so last year, the percentage of young people, keep in mind that in Serbia, young people are people who are between 18 and 30. In 2022, 40% of the young people believe in democracy. In 2023, 36.2% believe in democracy. So that means that we have around 3.8% of low numbers of young people who believe in democracy. So we see that the support for democracy is drifting away. Also, one more stat that I'm gonna tell, in 2022, the lack of trust in democracy in the same age category was 23.2%. And in 2023, that number is 29%. So again, bad figure. We see that the number of young people who lack trust in democracy is growing. And when we look back at the history, we should know that Serbia being a European country, and we all know that Europe is a bastion of democracy, Serbia being a young democracy that, keep in mind, up until 1991 was a communist dictatorship. And in the 90s, when the whole of the Eastern and Central Europe was going up with embracing democracy, free markets, liberal democracy, liberal values, we were a socialist autocracy. And when we look at the history, we've been a democracy for the last 23 years. And when you see this democratic backsliding, especially among young people, that sounds really bad. Also, one more stat that I think it's really important is that in 2023, 60% of young people in Serbia believe that Serbia needs a strong leader. So that clearly shows us a tendency towards autocracy, towards lack of independent institutions, lack of decentralization, which is, keep in mind, one of the most important aspects of having a free society. So when we look at all the stats, we see that Serbia is slowly going away from democracy, and it's going in my opinion, in a wrong way. That's basically bad for the development of the whole society.
Thank you, Aleksandar, for sharing some of those numbers and that data. I want to now talk about the project that you were involved in with CIPE. So a little bit of background for the audience, but as part of the 2022 FEDN Small Grants Program, Libek, a libertarian think tank in Serbia, headed up a program called Exploring Constructive Alternatives in a Volatile World. And the goal of this project was to offer the public in Serbia, but specifically young people in Serbia and students and future leaders, stories about economic successes that inspired and encouraged action. So tell us, Aleksandar, what inspired you to get involved in this project, and what did you do during the project? So
growing up in early 2000s, when Serbia was embracing democracy and liberal views in general, I always saw myself as a person who's a staunch believer in democracy, in economic and personal freedoms. And Libek as an organization was a perfect match for me, where I could meet people who share similar views as I do. Keep in mind that liberal values in Serbia aren't that popular, so it's really nice when you get to meet people who think the same as you do or similar, or at least the people with whom you can discuss things that interest you. And being a member of participating in Libek's activities, we had a chance to learn to attend sessions on which we were taught about globalization, free enterprises, democracy, general development of liberal thinking. We also had a chance to read certain books and to watch certain movies, and then later on we will discuss how those stories in those movies and books affect the society. And again, coming from a private sector, it was also really good that we had the sessions on which we were able to learn about public speaking. And I believe that learning some basics about public speaking is really important if you want to have a decent career in a private sector, because now the competition is great. You have many young people who are competing for good jobs that are scarce. So having more skills is a good thing. So I'm quite satisfied that I was that I attended lectures and workshops that were organized by Libec.
Great. Thank you, Aleksandar. This sounded like a really impactful project, and we're really glad that it had such success. But I now want to pose my final set of questions to this panel, and it involves the title of the panel, which is Intergenerational Collaboration. So I'd like to start with Robin. Robin, tell us, what are some actionable steps that individuals or organizations can take to promote intergenerational collaboration and to better ensure that the principles of free enterprise and democracy are embraced by younger generations? Sorry, Robin, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Ritika. It's a very important question. Like I think, but when we talk about intergenerational, issues, then we have to, I think, bear in mind what are the generations we are talking about, because the definition of generations vary country to vary. For my own specific purposes, and I like to, use youth as 15 to 24. And then young adults as 25 to 30, and then adults post 30. That's my own personal, use of generations. I find it very important that we engage with youth and young adults in regards to free enterprise and democracy when they are young, as early as we can, like probably when they're in high schools and as they go onto adult. Because if we are not able to reach out to this group of people at present, then there will be no one in the future to defend free enterprise and democracy, because people generally tend to shape up what they want to do, what they want to become by the time they're young adults or by the time they're 30. So the 15 to 30 is bracket is very important, and I think each generation should understand this, and especially people who are keen on protecting and saving the future of free enterprise and democracy should target towards this age group. Some of the tools that can be very useful are, of course, our own traditional tools of education, training, engaging with young people, because first, I think it has to start with awareness so they can choose to be or not be defendants of free enterprise and democracy, which I find is very important. On contrary to populist and dictatorial leadership, because they don't offer choices. I think that is what also probably sometimes makes us weak. But we as people who believe in democracy and free enterprise should also be able to offer enough information to young people, enough tools to young people, enough skills to young people, and empower them to choose on basis of rational information. And I think that is very important. I've also found that offering engagement opportunities like being fellows, or participating in policy making, or doing fellowships in government or parliament, or with politicians, or even with business chamber leaders. That also helps young people understand this, because they see it very closely. Also helping them with small funds and small funds and projects to actually engage in experimenting ideas with their colleagues and with their contemporaries also help. And I think CIPE Youth Leadership Program is an excellent example on this, what Blossom is talking about and what Aleksandar is talking about. This is probably for me, that's how it worked. You know, when I was young, I was engaged in advocating for free enterprise and democracy. Now it's become an integral part of me. So if we want to save the future, we have to invest in the present, on the young people in these various tools. Over to you, Ritika.
Very well said, Robin. Thank you. Blossom, I had the same question for you. What are some actionable steps that individuals or organizations or governments can take to promote intergenerational collaboration?
Okay, thank you so much, Ritika. I think one of the most important things is public-private partnership. I feel like there is some division between what the government should do and what private sector should do. For example, in my own local context in Nigeria, I found that a lot of private sector organizations do not, if they have like CSR projects, they rather do issues like gender equality, and which are all important causes. But when it comes to civic advocacy, a lot of them are not very keen. And I think it's because they do not want to be seen as being against the government, if that makes sense. Like, they don't want to be seen as being sort of like watchdogs. They don't want to give that impression to the government, because at the end of the day, you know, they are regulated by the government, and they do not want to create issues for themselves or create problems where they are not able to, they now get some bad regulation, are not able to do their businesses, you know, because they are seen as being problematic in some sense. So I think, you know, bridging that gap between public-private partnership where government and private sector organizations can work together to co-design interventions leaning on each other's strengths. So for example, when the government, including private sector organizations, for example, in technical working groups of the government, you know, where they want to create policies around entrepreneurship, like, you know, Robin speaks about, or other things in general, just ensuring that private sector organizations are also a part of that. I think also for private sector organizations, funding and support initiatives that promote democracy in their own way, especially youth-led and youth-driven initiatives. So, for example, giving your employees days off to register as voters or to go and vote, for example, these are things like that. Promoting voter education within your organization, you know, I know a lot of organizations have, I used to work for an organization where we used to have meetings every Monday, and somebody comes to speak about something, and it could just be speaking about, you know, the importance of, you know, civic engagement, civic participation, especially amongst young people. And I think for governments, one of the most important things they could do is reducing the, you know, age for political participation. I know in some countries, in Nigeria, for example, it's as high as 35, 40, you know, just it limits how much young people can participate or be active participants in their own government, giving them the opportunity to run for office if they desire to do so. And I think also creating strong agencies and institutions would support young people to participate, because like I mentioned during the elections, you know, the Electoral Commission, you know, there was so much that they did wrong during the elections, and it made a lot of young people lose faith in their ability to deliver free and fair elections. And so by strengthening those institutions and agencies, especially those that are integral to or important to delivering democracy, it would create more faith, you know, that young people would have in the government, which would make them, you know, want to participate or vote as well. And I think, you know, finally, at the end of the day, I think it's just about tolerance. You know, I think, like I mentioned, there's so many ethnic divisions and religious divisions, especially in Nigeria, which makes people vote across religious or ethnic lines. And, you know, even for organizations and even in governments, we see these things happen as well. I think this is just my rounding off point, which is just tolerance, you know, and, you know, understanding that when it comes to democracy, it goes beyond all of these divisions, and it goes, the most essential thing is that we're getting leadership that will eventually serve the people and deliver upon what it has said it will deliver upon, or what it is supposed to deliver upon. Those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Blossom. I just want to conclude my questions with Aleksandar. So similar question for you about intergenerational collaboration, but specifically, let's talk about the EU, because of course that's very relevant to you. But what is the difference between younger and older generations in Serbia about Serbia's ascension to the European Union and about embracing some of these democratic and market reforms? Because we had discussed some of this already, but according to a survey in 2022, there was an increase in the number of young people who opposed Serbia's membership in the EU. So I think it was 41% of young people opposed membership and only 33% support it. And that 33% of young people that do support it is smaller than the general public. So what has your experience been about this?
Thank you for the question. I think it's really important to talk about it. Again, coming from the Europe, but not from the EU, it's quite frustrating for us as Serbian citizens to not be in the EU, considering that EU today is a major trading bloc. You have freedom of movement. You can work wherever you want in the EU, from Sweden to Portugal to Estonia to Ireland, and being from Serbia, that's not possible, really. We can travel visa-free, but we cannot work, we cannot apply to jobs that easily because they have, in the EU, they have European citizens who are priority. Coming up from that, so I think that the major problem today in Serbia is propaganda, especially that the propaganda that's being marketed towards younger people. Younger people in Serbia are not watching regular media like TV, radio stations. They do not read newspapers or news portals that older people do. They are mostly on TikTok, on Instagram, and many authoritarian countries that do not want Serbia to join Western world, not just the EU, but the Western world in general. They produce content that's being marketed to younger people. And then when you fill the brains of young people with anti-Western, anti-EU propaganda that's quite often based on lies, what do you expect? What do you expect? Of course, that young people are not going to be that pro-EU. However, being a concrete person, meaning the person that likes concrete answers to some questions, to some problems, I believe that the EU should, and not just the EU, when I say the EU, I mean the West in general. I believe that the West and the EU should give something to Serbia that will increase the popular support to joining. I'm going to state a fact. In 2009, the support for the EU was the largest ever. It was almost 80%. Keep in mind, that was during the global financial crisis when people were losing jobs. And we all know that when you have a recession, people tend to move towards autocracy, away from democracy. They tend to move towards protectionism. However, in 2009, majority, 80% of Serbian citizens were in favor of the EU. Why is that the case? Simply because EU decided to ditch visa policy for entering of the EU as a tourist. And of course, being in the EU, for example, my family, along with 1 million of Serbs, they go to vacation to Greece, which is in the EU, and before that they needed a visa, and no one likes to stand in the line to wait for just a stamp in the passport. And that's why I believe that if the EU and the West in general want Serbia closer to them, they should provide, for example, for Serbia access to the EU's labor market, where we could all participate as equal Europeans. Also, when I want to make a phone call to my friend in Germany, there's going to be insane roaming charges, while you do not have that in the EU among EU members. So I believe in the concrete actions that will actually help people in Serbia realize that EU and the West in general is our path. That's where we belong, historically, economically, culturally, etc. Also, one more thing that I would like to say, when I mentioned the stamp in the passport previously for the visa, I believe that the good way of intergenerational development when it comes to digitalization is a way to go. Because when you have older countries like Serbia and Eastern Europe in general, where you have a large percentage of older people, the great way to get them more competitive in the job market is to embrace digitalization, but not to force them down their throats, but to make government more digital, to explain to the people why are you going to wait in line for like 1 hour to just get a stamp in a paper when you can finish it online. And I believe that the e-uprava, that's how we pronounce it in Serbia, e-governments on English, is a way to go. That's a government website where you can finish many administrative and bureaucratic tasks. And for example, 2 years ago, during COVID pandemic, when I wanted to get my vaccine for COVID, I could just register online for it, and then I would get the date and the time slot when I should get the vaccine. So I believe when we embrace digitalization, people become more competitive on the job market, and of course, the government becomes more transparent. You destroy corruption because you do not have to bribe someone to keep the line or just to get a piece of paper. So in conclusion, get us closer to the West, give us proper benefits, and embrace digitalization, free trade, of course, more private investment, make more business-free climate in Serbia, and then I believe everything is going to be all right. If you are interested, I suggest looking at the example of Estonia that embraced all of these values. And today, Estonia has quite big average net wage. They live in a free democracy. They know where they belong. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Aleksandar. I know that we don't have too much time left, but I did want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So let me begin with a question that we have here from Adam Perkins Goldstein. It's for anybody on the panel. Do you find that youth engaged in entrepreneurship have more favorable opinions of democracy? So I guess I'll just start by saying, Adam, that, as I mentioned at the top of the panel, we see a lot of translation between the skills that entrepreneurs have and other essential elements of democracy, whether it's leadership, whether it's entrepreneurial mindset, and basically the translation from entrepreneurship to greater political participation is pretty well established. But if anyone else has any thoughts on this question, please chime in. Maybe Robin, I can start with you.
Well, thank you. It's a very important question, actually. Generally, no, I would say. If yes would have been an answer, then Singapore would have been a beautiful democracy by now. So, it doesn't always ensure that young people who are into entrepreneurship and have skills in entrepreneurship would automatically support democracy. It really depends on the regime you are in. But when you're imparting skills in entrepreneurship, if you impart those skills in conjunction with its relation to democracy and how democracy makes it possible for them to do all kinds of businesses, including media and everything, maybe then that landscape sticks to the people, it sticks to young people's mind. So I think this is very tricky when we're doing. One of the our own experiences was, therefore we didn't make it in the School of Entrepreneurship. We made it in the School of Economics and Entrepreneurship, so that we were able to also explain to them the essentials of democracy as a framework for entrepreneurship. So I think we have to be quite careful in messaging it. We have seen a lot of regimes around the world and leaders around the world have put aside democracy and have imparted only entrepreneurship to people, and that has been miserable. And one of the examples I mentioned at the beginning of my statement, Singapore. It's a great example.
Yeah, I suppose I do agree that it can't just be entrepreneurship. It has to be other enabling, other conditions to create an enabling environment for democratic values as well. But let's move on to another question that I see here, and this one is for Aleksandar. Aleksandar, what do you think is the main reason that 60% of youth in Serbia prefer a strongman to lead the country? But just to clarify, did you say 60% of people preferred a strongman, or was it 60% of youth?
Youth.
Okay,
60% of youth. So I believe that that's something that comes from education, because when we go to school, we do not really talk that much about democracy. We do not talk that much about liberty and personal and economic freedoms. I always like to state these two things, personal and economic freedoms, because I believe that if you're a free individual, you will always support democratic values. However, I'm saying that from perspective of European. Of course, I agree with Robin when he mentioned Singapore, but I believe that depends on the region and general culture that people share. Coming back to Serbia, I believe it's because of education. We do not talk that much about democracy in school. And also because many young people come from families that have been impoverished by transition from socialist way of doing everything in the 90s, and we had a transition in 2000s, and many young people just stopped believing in democracy, and when they grow up in poverty, etc., they basically just stopped believing in that. And also because of the media situation in Serbia, many relevant organizations suggest that there is a lack of freedom of press in Serbia, and I completely agree with that. You do not have that much media freedom in smaller places. I live in Belgrade, so I have independent media all around me, but in smaller towns where my family is from, where I have relatives, that's not really the case. So I believe education, family, and media. However, I forgot to state, we had elections last year in 2020, general and presidential elections, and turnout was, I believe, 8% bigger compared to the last elections in 2020. So I believe that people have kind of become more democratic in a way that they want to vote, but that doesn't necessarily suggest that they are less supportive of autocratic regimes.
Got it. Thank you, Aleksandar. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I know, I just got one. Or maybe it's more of a comment. So Mikra from the Policy and Program Learning team at CIPE says it's often been reported that one of the reasons why youth distrust in democracy is high is because of so-called transition fatigue. Yes, I mean, I would just comment on that and say that that definitely has been reported, that youth have transition fatigue. They're less engaged with democracy compared to generations before them, because many of these generations that came before current generations challenged authoritarian systems, and they won greater political and civic freedoms, right, as a result of that. So with a lot of these new democracies, we just don't, young people don't have that experience, as some of our panelists talked about. But did any of you want to comment on that, Robin or Blossom or Aleksandar?
Can I?
Please.
Okay, yeah. So I mentioned before, Serbia in late 90s was autocratic socialist autocracy, and we transitioned to a democracy in the year of 2000, when many people who come from generation of my parents, they fought for democracy. We had a president who was literally killing his opponents, who was killing independent media. And of course, people were fed up with that. And that's why you see higher turnouts in the elections from people who you see a higher turnout in the age category of middle-aged people than in the youth for exact reason, because the middle-aged people, they fought for democracy and they won. However, young people take it for granted because they think, oh, that's something that we always have. However, we have many proofs that even liberal democracies can slide back to autocracy. Hungary,
Right.
Poland, Serbia, etc.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap. I know that there's a lot of different things that we could still talk about, but it's been really a pleasure to have all of you on this panel to hear about your experiences and some of the programs and projects that you've implemented and participated in. I really have been very inspired by some of these suggestions that you've provided the audience and some of the activities. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really, really appreciate it. And I just wanted to let everybody know as well that there is going to be about a 30-minute break now to give participants the opportunity to network and explore booths. So please go ahead and do that on the FEDN conference platform. But again, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you, Ritika.